Hey guys, tonight we're tucking ourselves in for a bedtime story spicier than Aunt Karen's Facebook feed, and somehow even more sleep-deprived. The tale of why 19th century mothers, loving, resourceful, and only a little bit desperate, gave their babies opium. That's right, actual opium. The kind that now gets locked in a pharmacy safe, but used to come in cheery glass bottles right next to your cough syrup. Before we get started, go ahead and like the video and subscribe if, you're into this sort of deeply educational nonsense. Drop a comment and tell me about the weirdest thing your mum did to calm you down. I promise, nobody's beating gave you morphine for teething. Now, dim those lights. Slide your phone under your pillow so it won't judge you for falling asleep before the video ends. Maybe kick on a fan for a little white noise and get truly comfortable. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what Victorian babyhood actually entailed? Were bassinets really just tiny opium dens? Did mothers hand out laudanum every time a baby whimpered, or just when dad was trying to sleep off a night at the gin palace? How did you shampoo a child who's basically napping through their own bath because they're high as a kite? Have you ever tried to burp a baby who's so mellow he might actually slip under the table? What brand of parental desperation leads you to reach for the Godfrey's cordial instead of, say, a lullaby? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1852. Your dress weighs 40 pounds. Your socks are made out of actual wool. There's a bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup in the kitchen cabinet. And, oh look, your baby just swallowed something with a skull and crossbones on it. Good luck. It's your first day as a Victorian mother, and the room smells like a cross between boiled cabbage and candle wax. You're surrounded by a gaggle of determined women who all look vaguely like you, plus one befuddled doctor whose medical bag mostly contains gin and moustache wax. Childbirth is short on anaesthesia, but long on advice, ranging from bite down on this stick to just think of Queen Victoria. Welcome to motherhood, now with more screaming. The Victorian birthing room was not for the faint of heart. The idea of privacy had not fully bloomed. Instead, you, the mother, became a group project. Sisters, mothers-in-law, great-aunts, and the odd neighbour all packed themselves into your bedroom to supervise, coach, and occasionally faint. If you were among the upper classes, perhaps you were fortunate to have a skilled midwife, or at least someone who had birthed more sheep than people. If not, well, there was always Mrs. Grimsby from down the lane who swore by chamomile tea and the laying on of hands. Medical science was, shall we say, experimental. The doctor would arrive, in a cloud of cologne and self-importance, brandishing forceps and a copy of Gray's Anatomy. He probably hadn't finished reading. Anesthesia existed, but was rare, and viewed with suspicion. Many Victorians fretted that pain relief during childbirth was against nature, and some even believed that suffering purified the mother's soul. As a result, most pain relief involved clenching every muscle, gnashing your teeth, and trusting in the dubious comfort of a warm compress and a prayer. Some well-off mothers might have heard whispers of the new chloroform anesthesia, made thrillingly fashionable after Queen Victoria herself demanded it for her 8th child. Never mind that accepting anesthesia was slightly scandalous. If it was good enough for the Queen, it slowly became acceptable for everyone whose relatives didn't scowl at British medical progress. For everyone else, coping methods ranged from clutching religious icons to cursing the name of every male ancestor who contributed to your current predicament. And what of fathers, you ask? Victorian men preferred to stay anywhere except in the birthing room. Seen as too delicate, or just too squeamish, husbands were usually exiled to smoke cigars, pace the hallway, or, if they were truly courageous, write nervous entries in their diaries about the womanly constitution. The prevailing logic was simple. Childbirth was a women's affair, and the presence of a man might cause mass hysteria or a spontaneous fainting epidemic. The birthing experience itself was marked by rituals, both practical and peculiar. Clean linens were a must, as infection lurked everywhere. Victorian doctors only discovered the importance of hand-washing halfway through the era, often after several tragic and avoidable mishaps. Aromatherapy, in the form of bouquets and scattered herbs, served a dual purpose: to mask the stench of labour and, they hoped, to keep evil spirits at bay. Once the ordeal ended, celebrations were carefully calibrated. Cheers were in order for a successful birth, but joy was often tempered by the realities of the era. Infant and maternal mortality rates were grimly high. Every healthy cry from the new arrival was a small miracle. Visiting relatives paraded in, cooing over the infant, and offering unsolicited wisdom on how to raise strong sons and demure daughters. So, as you cradle your newborn, exhausted, sweaty, and perhaps slightly resentful of Queen Victoria's pain-free labour, it's finally your moment to bask in the glow of Victorian motherhood. Ignore the dozen hands fussing around you. Ignore the doctor's attempts to look knowledgeable while surreptitiously searching for the nearest nip of gin. You've survived the rite of passage, and now the real work begins. Babies in Victorian England cry. A lot. There's no baby monitor, just your slightly heightened paranoia that an upstairs neighbour will show up and offer you boiled onions as a solution. Every time your child sneezes, Aunt Maud recommends putting them in a drafty hallway, or worse, under a pile of hot bricks. Infant care is mostly guesswork, superstition, and a healthy dose of praying nobody catches cholera. There's a certain choreography to raising a child in this era. 1 part dodging unsolicited advice, 2 parts trying not to poison your own family. You're constantly oscillating between underfeeding and overfeeding, since no one has bothered to invent the pediatric growth chart. Did the baby refuse her mashed turnip again? Best call in Dr. Larkspur, who will with absolute confidence recommend a tincture of opium. The bottle's reassuring label, soothing syrup, doesn't mention the small matter of dependency, but it does quiet the crying. And isn't that what everyone wants at 2 in the morning? Sleep is a rare and precious currency. Rocking a cradle in a dark, drafty flat, you listen for the telltale wheeze that could spell croup, or perhaps the beginnings of a head cold. Or was it just the wind howling through poorly fitted windows? Every sound takes on ominous proportions. Those with means might employ a wet nurse, but for everyone else, it's you, your wits, and possibly a questionable recipe for barley water. Society, of course, has plenty of rules, mostly impossible to follow. Babies must be swaddled tightly, but not too tightly. Fresh air is essential, but, according to grandfather's pamphlet, so is good English coal smoke to harden the lungs. If you dare leave your child unattended for even a moment, rumours swirl that you're dooming them to a lifetime of frailty. Yet, step outside for a breath and your neighbour will suggest dunking the baby in cold water to build constitution. Parental anxiety is a group project. Everyone pitches in. Then there's the constant spectre of illness. Before antibiotics, before germ theory really caught on, every fever becomes a test of your interpretive skills and how quickly you can deflect the intervention of local healers. Grandma insists a mustard poultice cures everything, while half the pamphlets at the apothecary recommend brandy. Yes, even for newborns. If you have the energy to argue, you're probably not parenting hard enough. Still, amidst this hustle of panicked improvisation, there's extraordinary resilience. You master the delicate art of sharing a damp woolen blanket with a colicky infant and improvising lullabies between sighs. You develop a sixth sense for detecting a fever by kissing a forehead. Never mind that the science is thin. It's all you've got. There are unspoken rituals, too. A lucky silver spoon slipped under a pillow, or a protective sprig of rosemary tied to a cradle. And yet, there are moments of surprising joy. Your child's toothless grin after a night of worry feels like a reprieve, a small victory against the void of uncertainty. Old wives' tales and kitchen cures, though wildly inconsistent, offer comfort. The sense that you're not alone in the parlour of perpetual worry, but connected to an endless procession of anxious parents, each improvising their way through the fog. By the end of each long night, the boundaries between wisdom and superstition blur, and you learn to embrace the chaos. The only certainty is that there is no certainty, not about feeding, fever, or the dubious healing powers of goose fat. Still, you soldier on, armed with hope, a modest stash of laudanum, and the belief that, somehow, you're doing it right, even if everyone else insists you aren't. Let me know if you'd like tweaks, or if you want to integrate dialogue or other storytelling flourishes. Victorian babies don't just teethe, they wage war on their own mouths. Your mother-in-law insists rubbing whiskey on the gums is traditional, but you're all out. So instead, you reach for that miracle in a bottle. Opium syrup. At least, this way everyone might actually sleep tonight, including you. Teething in the Victorian era wasn't merely a rite of passage for an infant, it was a crucible for entire households. Imagine endless nights punctuated by guttural yowling, red-faced babies drooling rivers onto starched collars, and desperate parents willing to try anything short of an exorcism to quell the agony. The medical establishment of the day, always keen to help and equally keen to profit, seized on this chaos with commendable gusto. Pharmacies overflowed with a dizzying arsenal. Calomel powders, soothing plasters, and the aforementioned opiate-laced concoctions. If it could numb, sedate, or distract a suffering child and the nerves of the adults, Victorian parents would buy it. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was the most notorious, boasting a healthy dose of morphine alongside promises of peacefully slumbering infants. Of course, Victorian advertisers had no obligation to mention the slight side effects, such as addiction, respiratory depression, or, as a minor afterthought, death. People trusted the advertisements. After all, testimonials used the phrase "my little angel" a lot. At the same time, dental experts, emboldened by the cutting edge of 19th century science, recommended lancing the gums with a sharp penknife, preferably by candlelight, and accomplished with a firm yet loving hand. If there was bleeding, so much the better. Victorian medical theory held that releasing bad humours could only help. If nothing else, it provided a graphic distraction for anyone within sight of the ordeal. This was all in the name of staving off an apparently endless roster of terrors blamed on teething, fever, diarrhea, convulsions, and even death. The medical textbooks talk about teething fits with the kind of drama one usually reserves for biblical plagues. It's little wonder that parents approach the teething season with the 1,000-yard stare of a soldier about to go over the top. And let's not forget the domestic sphere. Teething was a social event, complete with unsolicited advice, neighbourly suggestions involving potato slices tied to the baby's ankles, and the relentless hovering of elder relatives. The mother's self-esteem suffered. Having a baby who didn't teethe easily became a character flaw. One might hear, with a pointed sigh, "In my day, We just rubbed a little gin on the gums and got on with it. The underlying implication: you're coddling yours. No wonder he's shrieking. In short, teething in the Victorian home was a battleground, pitting deeply entrenched beliefs against desperate innovation. Science hadn't quite separated sense from superstition, so parents zigzagged between home remedies and questionable quackery. In darkened nurseries across Britain, exhausted caregivers performed their midnight rituals, applying dubious tinctures and muttering silent prayers, or at times simply stuffing wads of linen into their own ears and waiting for dawn. If the baby survived teething, and most miraculously did, it was less due to the marvels of Victorian medicine than the astounding resilience of the human species. Today, we marvel, or shudder, at the range of remedies once paraded as cures. Yet the image of a red-faced, inconsolable child and a parent rummaging through the larder for something, anything that might end the torture, is a thread connecting Victorian nurseries to our own. To sum up, teething troubles weren't just about baby teeth breaking through. They were a test of Victorian nerves, ingenuity, and above all, the supreme parental gift of patience. Though, as every exhausted parent knows, no era ever had quite enough of that in supply. There are more kinds of soothing syrup on your shelf than there are kinds of jam. Each one promises to quiet your child while helpfully listing opium as the main ingredient, in case you were worried about being too responsible. Modern products warn about drowsiness. Victorian ones basically guarantee it forever. But soothing syrup wasn't content with mere variety in function. It was also a contest in excess. Syrups boasted flavours both enticing and alarming. Honey, licorice, peppermint, and sometimes with less imagination but more punch, straight laudanum. If you can picture a grocer's shelf, Victorian style, there's a bottle of syrup for every parental anxiety. Is your child teething? There's a syrup for that. Are their teething pains simply not severe enough to warrant opium? Not to worry. Some brands thoughtfully combined morphine and cocaine. For that, please stop crying until next week approach. Each glass bottle beckoned with ornate fonts and sympathetic names. Mother's Little Helper, Godfrey's Cordial, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. The names alone are invitations to trust, to assume that medicine makers naturally have your child's best interests at heart. And if attractive packaging wasn't enough, Victorian advertising played its own role, waxing poetic about gentle sleep and asankai, quieted nerves, while skimming lightly over the narcotics content. Sometimes the real sales pitch was in what wasn't said. Manufacturers seemed to operate on the comforting Victorian maxim: what you don't know won't hurt you. Except, of course, when it very much did. On a deeper level, the sheer range of syrups on offer reveals more than just entrepreneurial enthusiasm. In an era long before regulated dosages and clinical trials, quantity substituted for quality and novelty masked risk. A new flavour or a bolder claim, stops all crying in 5 minutes, meant standing out in a veritable pharmacological Wild West, one where customer loyalty could be earned not through efficacy, but by how swiftly and thoroughly your child fell asleep. The more alarming part, perhaps, was just how normalised these concoctions became. Newspapers published testimonials, real and less than real, and doctors, blissfully unaware of withdrawal or toxicity, recommended these syrups for everyday fussiness. Anxious mothers compared notes in the grocer's queue. I prefer the lemon flavour, it doesn't stain the linens. Word of mouth kept the market afloat, while tragic outcomes were often written off as failure to thrive, or some mysterious malady of childhood. Naturally, the ease with which anyone, parent, neighbour, or random Victorian busybody could purchase these syrups contributed to their ubiquity. The pharmacist was not a gatekeeper, but an enthusiastic salesman, only too happy to recommend a syrup for coughs, colic, boredom, or any other childhood condition that might disturb the adult peace. And the housemaid, left in charge of squalling infants, had only to reach for whatever syrup promised the quietest afternoon. Yet, within this dizzying diversity, patterns emerge. The very prevalence of opium-based syrups points to a culture with fraught edges, one eager to engineer calm at almost any cost. The dilemma for parents was real: take the risk of sleepless nights, or put their trust in the array of brightly labelled bottles, a choice between short-term peace and long-term peril, often disguised as maternal care. Looking back, the flavours and formulas of these syrups read like a cautionary tale in branding and blind faith. The bittersweet legacy is plain. Soothing syrups, with their kaleidoscopic flavours and promises, remind us how far parents will go to quell chaos, and how easily hope can be bottled, sometimes with consequences that outlast any advertised calm. Doctors, fresh from the medical academy, read Barbershop, assure you that every baby needs a little soothing. They show you neat diagrams of digestive tracts and then prescribe laudanum for both baby and, if you look tired enough, maybe mum too. The only thing more common than opium is a good head cold, so there's plenty to go around. Victorian medicine operated on a reassuringly simple principle. If it hurts, numb it. If that fails, amuse it into silence. It's the sort of logic that makes you wonder if Queen Victoria herself kept a bottle of laudanum on her nightstand. In Britain's parlours and nurseries, bottles of opium-based concoctions, dubbed soothing syrups, glistened in the gaslight. Their labels trumpeted relief from colic, coughs, teething, and virtually anything else that threatened a baby's peace and a parent's sleep. Soothing syrup wasn't just a product, it was a silent pact between exhausted parents and a medical establishment comfortably unaware of things like addiction or, say, lethality. How did this florid affection for opiates come about? Blame both the era's unchecked optimism and a robust lack of medical regulations. To the Victorian, progress chimed through every alley, whether in the form of railways or racks of bottled cure-alls. Trust in science, and those with impressive facial hair, was high. Before germ theory left its mark, the universe of illness was best visualised as a battlefield of nameless phantoms, and laudanum was the all-purpose cannon. Crying baby at midnight? Laudanum. Tooth coming in sideways? Laudanum. Moody temperament in the nursery? You guessed it. The logic extended, inevitably, to parents themselves. Victorian mothers were often judged not by their patience or devotion, but their success as amateur apothecaries. A well-stocked medicine cabinet, all bottles safely within a child's reach, was a sign of maternal love and modern sensibility. The pharmacy was as important as the cradle. And let's not forget that dosing instructions were at best flexible. An ambiguous teaspoon here, a heroic tablespoon there. The shops of Fleet Street and beyond pulsed with chemists' remedies, confident in both their claims and their ingredients. Morphine mixtures, paregoric cordials, and, for the more adventurous, cocaine-laced toothache drops, a treat for the discerning toddler. After all, the medical marketplace was as unregulated as a Victorian street fair. The only licensing required was a flair for advertising. If you didn't trust the doctor, perhaps you'd trust the frantic testimonials that Mrs. Nesbitt's infant's preservative had delivered 3 babies, 2 cats, and a spaniel through teething without a single complaint. The strangest part, for most Victorians, this ethos worked until it didn't. Baby quieted, Mother rested, at least for a night. But behind the hush, a silent epidemic loomed. By the late 19th century, newspapers occasionally sounded alarm bells about infantile poisoning. But these warnings were drowned out by advertisements that promised peace, civility, and just a little more sleep. Today, of course, we clutch our pearls at the thought. Yet consider, Victorians were scrambling to quiet the terrors of childhood at a time when infant mortality was heartbreakingly high and medical certainty was a distant dream. The real surprise may not be that opium made its way into the cradle, but that in a world without antibiotics, anesthetics, or reliable advice, parents wouldn't try just about anything for relief. In the end, Victorian medicine was less about science and more about daily survival, a complicated dance with the unknown, buffered by a dash of hope and a rather alarming dose of laudanum. It's easy to laugh, nervously, with hindsight. But in a society where both life and medical experimentation frequently began in the nursery, perhaps the real legacy is the reminder of how far we've come and how much the desperate logic of sleepless nights still resonates today. Now here is your section 6 extended to approximately 600 words, following these principles. You pour a little cordial into a teaspoon and hope for the best. There are no dosage charts, just a general sense that too much will make everyone very, very quiet, which is kind of the point. The baby falls asleep before you finish humming your lullaby. The cat, suspiciously licking the spoon, also sleeps for a week. Of course, this isn't how it's supposed to work. Parenting books don't have chapters called Sleep Elixirs and you won't find many pediatricians recommending just a dash of gin. But for entire generations, quietly medicating children at bedtime, whether with a homemade tonic, a drop of laudanum, or the modern cousin, Benadryl, was simply one of those unspoken household arts. The recipe for a good night's sleep passed down alongside the family roast, a domestic tradition whispered between mothers, slightly mortified but mostly grateful. Let's be honest for a moment. The line between soothing and sedating is blurrier than most people care to admit. You start out wanting to calm, and sometimes you end up anesthetizing. A fretful baby at 3 a.m. can make even the most ardent purist wonder about the miracle properties of a tot of Madeira. If a half teaspoon of cordial buys everyone a few hours' peace, who's to say it isn't, just this once, the lesser evil? But the shadow of too much is always lurking in the corner of the nursery. There's a ghostly sense of guilt in every cautious pour. How many spoons is too many? How long will this peace last? Until morning? Or until you're counting tiny heartbeats with mounting panic? For every parent who ever said, out loud or silently, just this once, there are a dozen stories whispered between friends, shared in hushed tones on playgrounds or over hurried coffee. The stories always feature that balancing act. The relief of silence weighed against the pit in the stomach feeling of uncertainty. Did you do the right thing? Or did you cross an invisible line you'll spend years trying to redraw? And yet, the tradition endures, albeit in subtler, modern forms. The names have changed, but the impulse lingers. Instead of cordials laced with alcohol, there are essential oils promising gentle, holistic slumber. Instead of teething, powders containing morphine, there are herbal drops clinically proven to support rest. Even guided meditations and whale sounds sometimes promise what every parent in truth wants: a shortcut, something, anything that works. Still, it's difficult to shake the underlying fear that you might, in the name of love or survival, go too far. The urge to quiet a cry with a concoction is paired with the nagging worry that you're cheating somehow. cheating the child, cheating yourself out of some character building, if excruciating, long night. No matter how desperate you are in the moment, no matter how cute the packaging, the echo of 1,000 mothers and fathers before you lingers. How much is too much? Not in milliliters or milligrams, but in the slow, creeping accumulation of doubt. And so, tonight, as you tuck the baby in and tiptoe out, you listen for the soft hush of restful breathing, for the secrets of sleepers past. You wonder if tonight is the night you finally get it right, or, at the very least, the night when you don't get it devastatingly wrong. Parenting is, after all, a series of careful experiments, equal parts hope, trial, and quiet terror. In the morning, the cat stirs, the baby gurgles, and life resumes, chaos and all. You wash out the spoon, swear you'll do things differently next time, and tuck your doubts away with the bottle at the back of the cupboard. How much is too much? The answer changes, as ever, with the dawn. Your neighbour insists opium syrup saved her entire family's sanity. Another mother claims her child hasn't blinked in 2 days. Pamphlets warn about overuse on page 10, after 9 full pages of testimonials about how nobody's child ever cried again. If you think modern parenting forums are a minefield of judgment and conflicting advice, imagine the Victorian era, a time when the loudest voice in childcare was probably a pharmacist with a top hat and questionable ethics. Forget about gentle parenting podcasts or the endless stream of helpful Instagram reels. In 1875, parenting advice meant trying whatever your neighbour's cousin's doctor recommended, and then hoping for the best. We complain today about being told to cut out gluten or just sleep train, but at least nobody's suggesting laudanum for a toddler's tantrum. At least, not openly. Victorian-era parents waded through a swamp of pamphlets, booklets, advice columns, and, yes, face-to-face encounters, somehow even less anonymous than a Facebook group comment thread. There were no catchy usernames or 20-character long screen names to hide behind. You got your advice, unsolicited and unfiltered, right on your doorstep, or at the local grocer, and everyone within earshot chimed in. Sometimes with their own miracle cures. Picture Mrs. Pennyworth announcing at the bakery, "Well, my Edith hasn't had a nightmare since we started her on the beef broth enemas." The rest of the line nods, some scribbling notes, some grimacing in silent horror. And it wasn't just other mothers and local busybodies. The pamphlets that circulated were a special breed. Some claimed to be written by doctors, some by experienced mothers, and still others by people who seemed to have based their expertise solely on the fact that they had once met a child. They ranged from relatively sensible, ensure a draft does not chill the child at night, to the exuberantly unhinged, allow a spoonful of sherry for teething discomfort, accompanied by 2 drops of ether if fussiness persists. Every new page introduced a fresh paradox. Strict discipline, but constant tenderness. Endless patience, but also firmness bordering on the military. If you were confused, you were not alone. The contradictions weren't only in print. Just as in modern times, there were parenting cliques, the all-natural mothers who swore by goat's milk and frigid baths, versus the science moms, eagerly adopting whatever new tonic or gadget Dr. Hargrave was testing this month. Sometimes these rival groups would convene, say, at a church picnic, creating all the tension of a modern Facebook debate, but with bonnets instead of profile pictures. And if all else failed to settle the argument, someone's great aunt inevitably invoked the wisdom of nature, usually meaning, just let the child eat dirt and see who survives. Mind you, the anxieties were real. Victorian parents worried about teething, sleep, illness, impossibly strict manners, and future employability. If little Arthur does not learn his Latin declensions, how will he fare as a future barrister? These worries were served with a side helping of moral panic. Coddle your children, some pamphlets whispered, and you'll raise a generation of weaklings, nervous, limp, ungovernable. But be too strict, and you might crush the tender flower of childhood forever. Some advice even blamed outlandish things for poor health, like reading sensation novels, or sleeping with the window open on a Tuesday. As you page through all this, you could almost hear the echoes of today's doom scrolling, each new bit of advice promising to be the key to happy, healthy, angelic children. In reality, the cacophony mostly fueled parental self-doubt. If anything, Victorian parenting advice serves as a comforting reminder. Conflicting, unsolicited, and sometimes dangerous suggestions are not a modern invention. They're a tradition. At least now we can fact-check. No ether required. So the next time you roll your eyes at a parenting meme or a heated thread about screen time, give a passing nod to your great-great-grandparents who faced the original comment sections, armed only with their wits, a jar of opium syrup, and a healthy dose of desperation. Your nursery is mostly made of hard edges and cold drafts, with the soothing scent of camphor and laudanum lingering in the air. Night falls. Everyone passes out. The baby, the dog, and possibly Grandpa. There's silence, a rare victory. But if you lie awake, you'll notice the rest of the room is far from quiet. The wind taps at the window panes, sliding icy fingers under the doorsill, testing your resolve. Moonlight slants across the wallpaper, dull prints arranged to resemble flowers, but fading fast from too many years of gaslight and candle smoke. Each time you shift on the lumpy horsehair mattress, the rusty frame grumbles in disapproval, echoing through the house like distant thunder. Few rooms in the Victorian home inspired more invention or superstition than the bedroom. Architects and housekeepers concocted elaborate rituals to keep homes with multiple inhabitants as safe and as healthy as possible through the dark hours. The Victorians, ever anxious about illness, clung to the idea of the miasma, invisible poisonous air lurking everywhere, especially at night. That's why your bed probably has a high carved headboard. It's not just for show. Headboards acted as makeshift windbreakers, positioned to block those drafts and trap warmth, but they never quite managed to defeat the persistent chill. As for the air itself, it's alive with the residue of daily Victorian life. Most rooms are doused with camphor, meant to clear the nose and ward off contagion, or laudanum, technically a painkiller but used rather liberally to usher the restless to sleep. The smell is thick, not unpleasant, but heavy, merging with starch from linen sheets and a thin animal tang from the hot water bottle nestled near your feet. If sickness visited the house recently, a vinegar-soaked rag might dangle from the bedpost, the era's answer to air freshener and disinfectant. Victorian bedtime routines are strictly observed, a cross between military discipline and superstition. Bed curtains are drawn, not out of prudery, but to corral warmth and keep out imaginary drafts as much as wandering eyes. Your grandmother may insist on an open window, however. Night air is both feared and recommended, depending on the latest scientific pamphlet. Ventilate, but don't catch cold, warns a voice down the hall. What you wear matters too. Instead of soft, stretchy pajamas, you wrestle with crinoline underthings or woolen nightshirts. No-nonsense nightcaps are pulled over heads to keep ears warm and curls in place. If you're lucky, your pillowcase is crisp linen. If not, it's a scratchy wool that itches into your dreams. Lulled by routine, the house quiets, but each room holds private anxieties. Will the baby stay asleep? Is Grandpa breathing? And what if something, anything, lurks under those voluminous beds? Victorian children know to keep toes tucked firmly under covers, just in case. All these efforts, from scented rags to fortified headboards, circle around a basic need: enough peaceful hours to recover from the long Victorian day. Each bedroom, in its way, is a battleground against the elements: cold, disease, and anxiety. Even the somnolent dog at your feet, dreaming of mutton bones, serves as an extra buffer against the chill. And above it all, that scent, the mingled sweetness and sting of medicines, starch, and some unnamed sense of home, becomes the perfume of sleep itself. Tomorrow the rituals will begin anew, but tonight, for a brief, rare stretch of time, the household drifts in the cocoon of Victorian dreams. This extension maintains the atmospheric, slightly ironic historical voice, weaves in sensory details about smell, texture, and ritual, and grounds them in the lived experience of a Victorian bedroom. If you'd like further tweaks or additional authentic details, let me know. As dusk approaches, it's time for the cordial. The ritual is equal parts science and hope. You even mutter a little prayer, just in case, and check to make sure you haven't swapped the opium with the shoe polish. Again! The preparations begin with a familiar clatter: the tray, the glass, the amber bottle perched beside a battered notebook where doses and side effects are meticulously tallied, as if this act of record-keeping could protect you from the wild, mysterious nature of what you are about to ingest. The gentle swish of the liquid as it meets the glass is ominous and comforting in equal measure, a signal to your body and mind. That night is spiraling in, and with it, the possibility of relief, or at least reprieve. This is not a solitary ceremony. The house quiets. Whoever is in charge of the dose, a spouse, a caretaker, a long-suffering friend, leans in with the grave seriousness of an alchemist. "How are you feeling?" they may ask, not expecting a real answer. The evening dose is a performance for a small, often anxious audience, everyone watching for the subtle signs: a twitch, a wince, a tremor in your hand as you bring the glass to your lips. In this dim half-light, memories of other rituals crowd in. You remember cups of cocoa or warm milk as a child, given to soothe you at night. This echo of care, deeply ingrained, almost primal, renders the act at once medical and profoundly human. But now, the stakes are higher. There's a gamble in every swallow. This time, you measure not only for taste, but for efficacy, bracing yourself for the twin spectres of pain or oblivion. There's always a margin of error. Has the tolerance shifted again? Did you eat enough to buffer your stomach, or too much, risking nausea? Every question is a sidelong glance at the true uncertainty at the heart of chronic illness. You must trust a medicine only just less dangerous than its absence. Is it enough? Is it too much? There is, somewhere in your spirit, a tally running. Nights gotten through. Nights stolen by side effects. Nights blurred into fever dreams. Yet, there is also faith. Not religious faith, perhaps, but a stubborn, deeply human hopefulness. A sharp intake of breath marks the moment your lips touch glass. You focus on the small, familiar, physical actions: the cool rim, the scent, bitter, pungent, not entirely unpleasant, the deliberate tilting back of your head. For a brief second, you feel like a character in an ancient rite. Maybe somewhere, someone has performed this same ceremony. Different drug, different century, same need for comfort against the unknown. You sit quietly, waiting. The room is filled with small, anxious silences. Sometimes someone tries to make conversation. Ask about the day. Make a joke. Laughter is careful, always respectful of surprises the medication may bring. You're never sure if you'll float gently into sleep or spend the next hour with your heart pounding, tracing the slow burning border of unease. You watch the clock, hope rising and falling with every passing minute. The ritual ends not with a bang, but a sigh. Gradually fatigue seeps in. The faces around you relax, anxiety dissolving as the worst possibilities fade. You give a tight smile, an unspoken agreement that, for tonight at least, the darkness will be just a little kinder. As your eyelids droop and the world blurs, it feels almost sacred. The courage it takes to trust the unknown, to drink and wait and hope for morning. If you have specific stylistic requests, more humour, more medical detail, more literary imagery, etc., or want references to certain characters or voices from your transcripts, let me know for a tighter fit to your project's unique voice. Opium's not just for babies, it's for fussy toddlers, anxious children, and perhaps, if mum's feeling reckless, the neighbourhood goat. Victorian family dinners are suspiciously quiet, punctuated only by occasional thuds as someone drifts off mid-pudding. The logic behind dosing an entire brood with laudanum before roast beef was simple. Peace at any price. Siblings, who just hours before had been waging civil war over tin soldiers, or the proper usage of the word whilst, now slumped together in fugue-like harmony, sticky jam hands limp at their sides. Toddlers, normally armed with ear-splitting shrieks and an inexhaustible supply of contraband marbles, were reduced to docile, blinking cherubs. Even the family dog eyed his food with a certain philosophical detachment, too drowsy to chase after the roast that fell to the floor. Of course, the sights and sounds of a properly sedated home required a certain adjustment. In many upper and middle-class households, silence was golden, but not necessarily reassuring. A suspicious absence of shrieking often sent parents to peek behind velvet drapes or under the piano, half expecting to find the children plotting mutiny, only to discover them gently snoring, cheeks flushed and halos of blonde curls understood. Nannies, who understood all too well that a quiet home was the direct result of a well-timed draft, congratulated themselves on job security, and perhaps poured a little gin in their own tea for good measure. Victorian advertisements assured anxious mothers that children's nerves, sense of adventure, and pesky tendency to survive the measles would all benefit from a soothing syrup. Sibling rivalry took on an entirely new dynamic. Arguments settled not with fists or tears, but by who could resist the soporific longest. In family portraits painted around this time, it's no wonder the children are unusually serene, sometimes appearing just on the verge of an REM cycle. There were, naturally, a few drawbacks. Dinner parties once flavoured with youthful squeals and the clatter of falling spoons now resembled a séance. Conversation hovered just above a whisper, in deference to the half-asleep third cousin, clutching a teacup. Aunts and uncles, hopeful for some childhood piano concerto, instead found themselves watching a slow-motion attempt at chopsticks, punctuated by long, thoughtful pauses, as little fingers struggled to recall the existence of the next note. Household pets were not immune to this atmosphere of chemically induced calm. Tomatoes went unthrown, chickens napped in flower pots. The goat, should it have sampled something suspicious, would momentarily discover the bliss of philosophical contemplation, or at least a profound disinterest in eating the laundry. As for the rare child with a cast-iron constitution, impervious to even the most heroic dose, she became an urban legend, a figure whispered about during sewing circles. You know little Agatha on the corner, built like a dray horse. Opium just gives her the hiccups. Mothers exchanged recipes for sleep. Vials were hidden between marmalade jars. And anyone caught with a lucid toddler after 6 p.m., was suspected of witchcraft. But beneath the surface, calm, lay the quietly competent chaos management skills of the Victorian matron, who tiptoed through a minefield of wooden blocks, tin whistles, and unpredictable temperaments. She mastered the art of the quick dose, the surreptitious refill, the strategic bribe. If peace required the aid of the poppy, so be it. She would restore convivial silence, one teaspoon at a time. So when you encounter those sepia-toned images of prim Victorian households, remember, still waters run deep. And sometimes, stillness is just a polite euphemism for post-pudding paralysis. The next time your home erupts with sibling rivalry or a toddler's protests, spare a thought for those bygone families who, through a miraculous blend of questionable medicine and sheer determination, managed to liven up even the dullest mutton stew, primarily by ensuring everyone was just a little bit too drowsy to complain. Fathers in this era are mostly ornamental. Their input on childcare ranges from "that's women's business" to "I'll be at the pub." Occasionally, one will read a newspaper article about the dangers of opium before politely ignoring it and asking for another scone. These are not the hands-on diaper-changing moon landing dads of future adoration. No, these are men whose influence in the nursery is more that of a decorative umbrella stand, ever present, curiously shaped, and almost entirely ignored unless needed as a prop in a family portrait. When it comes to teething rings or learning to walk, their engagement is mostly theoretical, offered in broad, often irrelevant pronouncements like "children should be seen and not heard," or, on a particularly involved day, a shouted "don't eat that." Mothers, aunts, sisters and nurses form the battalion that fights the daily skirmishes against naptime insurrectionists, colicky rebels, and the occasional outbreak of chickenpox. Fathers, on the other hand, exist pleasantly untethered from the domestic front lines. Their jobs are to provide, protect, and, in their own estimation, pontificate. Whether wistfully gazing out a study window or patting the head of their offspring with the air of congratulating a clever parrot, their role is very much outside the action. The reigning wisdom, shared by both men and women, is that too much paternal involvement might soften a child, especially a son. The idea that fathers need to exemplify sternness, preferably from a safe, emotional distance, is almost a civic duty. Fathers are the mythical bogeymen invoked when things get truly out of hand. Wait until your father gets home is the nuclear option, not the daily routine. The mere mention of paternal discipline is considered as effective as its actual application. In the rare event that a father is roped into childcare, perhaps during a household emergency or the unexplained absence of literally every single woman in the vicinity, he approaches the task with the same wary curiosity that Victorians might reserve for spiritualism or indoor plumbing. Instructions are followed with the grim determination of a man decoding hieroglyphics. The child is often returned to their mother with the relieved pride of an explorer who has successfully traversed the Congo and merely lost one shoe. The socially sanctioned distance between fathers and their offspring creates a universe of unshared moments and unconquered domestic challenges. Fathers pride themselves on imparting wisdom, timely advice about livestock, weather, or the subtle art of not embarrassing oneself at church. But as far as nappy rash or nightmares go, their contributions rarely extend beyond suggesting a brisk walk or, in extreme cases, a spoonful of brandy. This is all given social sanction by an endless parade of advice manuals, etiquette books, and family friends, all of whom agree a truly respectable father is dignified, slightly aloof, and far too busy to be seen crawling on the drawing room floor playing at horses. If he does engage, singing a lullaby or mending a doll's arm. He is regarded by neighbours as something between a saint and a lunatic. It is, after all, unseemly to see a man of his standing publicly bested by a toddler in a game of patter cake. And so, the gender divide in Victorian parenting solidifies. A chasm fortified by tradition and shrugged at by the men themselves. For most fathers, maintaining their ornamental status is not so much a dereliction of duty as a badge of honour. Their greatest contribution to a child's rearing is embodying the ultimate mystery. What precisely does father do all day? And why is it so important that he is never disturbed while doing it? The answers, as with so many things in this era, are seldom investigated. Father knows nothing, and, it turns out, that's just the way everyone likes it. Mrs. Winslow is the best friend you never met. Her syrup promises peace, quiet, and, crucially, a good night's sleep. The label features a smiling baby, because babies always smile after 10 drops of morphine. Picture the scene. It's 1875. The Industrial Revolution is thundering along. Factories belch smoke. Carriages rattle along crowded streets. And, in kitchens across America and Britain, desperate mothers are pouring Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup onto teaspoons. Their children are crying, or, more accurately, were crying. Now their eyes have glazed over, their complaints lost in a dreamy haze. The transformation is almost miraculous, and the testimonials roll in by post. Little Henry has become an angel. No more midnight wailing. It's as though he's drifting on a cloud, thanks to Mrs. Winslow. But beneath this domestic calm lies a far darker reality. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, first concocted in the mid-19th century, made no secret of its ingredients: morphine sulfate and alcohol. The advertisements, though, sandwiched the narcotic truth between promises of gentle relief and perfect repose. Dosage instructions read like a recipe for rest: teaspoonful every 4 hours, or as required. For infants. The medical establishment, while not unsuspicious of morphine, had far less oversight than today. Regulations were loose, and the notion of a patent medicine was, essentially, that anyone with a catchy name and compelling label could sell anything in a bottle. The marketers were relentless, painting Mrs. Winslow as a kindly, maternal saviour. Newspaper ads presented the syrup as almost supernatural. It calms teething, soothes colic, and dissipates fevers. In short, Mrs. Winslow could deliver what exhausted, overworked parents craved: silence. Imagine the relief of parents in overcrowded tenements, their day's labour starting before sunrise, their nerves fraying as infants wailed through the paper-thin walls. Sleep, that unattainable treasure, sat on a pharmacy shelf for a few pennies a dose. Yet here's where the script slips from gentle reassurance to cruel irony. The very magic promised by Mrs. Winslow was masking real harm. Morphine worked, spectacularly, but infants, with their tiny, vulnerable bodies, were being dosed to stillness, not safety. Medical journals, long before warning labels, began to report cases of alarming lethargy, respiratory distress, and, in tragic instances, unexplained infant deaths. The public, blissfully unaware, continued to reach for the familiar blue and white label, reassured by testimonials and the stamp of Victorian wholesomeness. The enduring power of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup isn't just in the product itself, but the story it tells about a past age's appetite for easy miracles. There's a grim comfort in a remedy that works instantly, whatever the cost. In fact, the syrup outlasted generations, finally being taken off the market in the early 20th century as health authorities caught up with the dangers hidden within the bottle. By then, countless infants had been soothed, sometimes into silence, sometimes into tragedy. Today, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup embodies the intersection of nostalgia and naivete. Its legacy lives on, not in medicine cabinets, but in cautionary tales. We search old bottles at flea markets, marveling at how something so dangerous could be packaged so innocently. The smiling baby remains, a quiet nod to a time when, for a few cents, anyone could buy peace. No questions asked. And so, Mrs. Winslow's soothing embrace lingers as a lesson. Some wonders are best left on the pharmacy shelf, their promises seductively simple and, all too often, too good to be true. Every time your baby hiccups, the lady down the street thinks it's cholera. Opium syrup is also recommended for cramps, fevers, mysterious Victorian diseases you've never heard of, and general disobedience. Because nothing says proper Victorian hygiene quite like rampant paranoia. It's the mid-1800s, and the word cholera has become the all-purpose bogeyman in every respectable household. Maybe your child sneezes? Cholera. Grandma's got indigestion? Cholera. Probably. Even your neighbour's chicken with a limp? Clearly. An early and deeply concerning sign of cholera. Of course, there's no shortage of home remedies and advice delivered earnestly by neighbours, friends, and the occasional self-appointed street corner expert. There's vinegar baths, for instance, which only serve to upset everyone's skin and generally escalate the paranoia, because now you smell even more like you're dying. If vinegar doesn't work, the answer is obviously to burn a sulphur candle in every room, because nothing soothes a worried Victorian like the acrid scent of chemical warfare. Some say to keep onions by your feet, which, at the very least, is a surefire way to maintain a safe distance from the equally anxious crowds on the omnibus. Medicine cabinets become veritable shrines to DIY chemistry, laudanum bottles, camphor oil, and enough bicarbonate of soda to leaven every loaf in London twice over. Newspapers print heroic illustrations of cholera prevention kits in which, suspiciously, half the items look like things invented after binge drinking at the local apothecary. Mysterious black powders, aromatic spirits of ammonia, and the odd dried toad for good luck. Doctor's orders, or perhaps superstition's orders. Hard to say. The authority figures of the era, those bespectacled gentlemen with impressive sideburns, weigh in from their stately offices. They assure the public that cholera is brought on by miasma, the bad air that seeps from the gutters and reeking back alleys of the city. Thus follows a great citywide campaign, not to manage sewage, but to perfume it. Street sweepers toss rose petals into the drains. Rich households buy imported sandalwood incense, and poor ones simply hold their noses and hope for the best. Panicked city councils legislate the burning of barrels of tar until whole neighbourhoods smell like an overextended shipyard. What's remarkable is how easily the public absorbs this wisdom, eager to assign familiar smells to safety and unfamiliar ones to doom. A whiff of lavender might be insurance against disease. Anything remotely sulphurous or suspiciously foreign is cause for a full household lockdown. Fear radiates outward, echoing through kitchens, schoolrooms, and marketplaces. Every normal ache, every cough or goosebump is a cause for alarm, a potential prelude to catastrophe. Victorian advertising, ever the opportunist, doesn't let this crisis go to waste. Posters boast magical cholera cures, available for a very reasonable price if you mail away today. Bottles arrive promising immediate relief, but delivering mainly alcohol, opium, or questionable minerals. Patent medicines fly off the shelves faster than bread, stocked with names like Dr. Cromorachoro, cholera cordial, and Aunt Millicent's miraculous miasma mixture. Whether they cure anything at all is beside the point. peace of mind is the most marketable product of the decade. In the drawing rooms and parlours, anxiety becomes a social currency. The more elaborate your rituals of cleanliness and prevention, the more seriously you are taken. Everyone is an amateur diagnostician, their language soaked in tales of distant outbreaks, terrifying symptoms, and the harrowing mortality of the last great visitation. Gossip flourishes as quickly as germs. Every conversation sounds half like a medical consultation, half like a séance. And so, the great cholera paranoia rolls on. A strange blend of scientific ignorance, inventive folk wisdom, and good old-fashioned fear. The city rattles with anxious remedies and midnight prayers, its people clinging to bottles and charms, all certain they're only one hiccup away from disaster, or, at the very least, from another stern lecture from the lady down the street. Forget antibacterial wipes. Your cleaning arsenal consists of one big, damp rag and whatever you can shake out the window. Dropped a pacifier. Just pop it back in. They say germs build character, or at least immunity, to basically everything except Victorian parenting advice. Back in the day, hygiene had less to do with scientific understanding and more to do with, well, not letting the farm animals sleep in the kitchen. A deep clean might simply mean someone took the broom and swatted away the noticeable dirt clumps, probably while humming to drown out the judgy silence of lingering dust bunnies. If the family was feeling particularly ambitious, windows were cracked to let in some allegedly brisk fresh air, meaning, in reality, the occasional whiff of coal smoke and the unmistakable musk of horse traffic. But hey, it qualified as ventilation. Soap was a luxury item, not the star of pandemic-fueled hand-washing marathons. The household bar, generously described as soap, did triple duty. It scrubbed dishes, children, and questionable stains alike. If you were unlucky enough to be fifth in line for Saturday's bath, your water was less a pristine soak and more like a historical reenactment of mud wrestling. Sharing was caring, except when it came to personal dirt. Then, sharing was just the rule. Let's talk about that communal approach to cleanliness. Towels, rarely washed naturally, passed from hand to hand, collecting the story of every sticky face and muddy paw along the way. Toothbrushes, for those ahead of the curve, were often communal too, and toothpaste was something you wished for on shooting stars, which you did spot, since most nighttime air was an open invitation for natural aromas. If kids scrubbed their teeth with salt or baking soda, that was considered fancy. Modern-day germaphobes would collapse at the sight of a Victorian kitchen. Raw meat, if within arm's reach, was often stored in a larder, which sounds charming, but was really just a shelf a little closer to the cool draft. Cross-contamination wasn't a health concern, it was how recipes got seasoned. Eggs sat unrefrigerated on the table, and milk was occasionally more curd than liquid by breakfast. If a bit of blue-green mould showed up somewhere, it was simply cut off, and the food soldiered on bravely to the dinner table. Illness was an everyday guest, and recovery was proof of one's robust constitution. Never mind that recovering actually meant simply returning to chores while still coughing into the same apron you used to wipe the table. Modern antiseptics were still a twinkle in some chemist's eye. If someone got injured, treatments ranged from a splash of gin to, unlucky for the patient, the healing power of a dirty rag and a mother's reassurance that it'll toughen you up. And yet, despite all this, people managed. Maybe it was the stubbornness of hope, or just the lack of alternatives, but cleanliness was a relative term. Today, we're armed with colour-coded sprays and triple-sealed wipes, and we flinch at the idea that our great-great-grandparents survived with little more than determination and a family rag. But the past's grubby hands and questionable towels have shaped generations tougher than we may realise. So, next time someone gasps at a dropped cookie or a muddy paw print on the couch, just remember, there's a long tradition behind shrugging it off and reaching for the rag. Germs may build character, but history shows they also built a particular brand of resilience, the kind you can't disinfect away. Your baby's diet is mostly overboiled carrots, questionable milk, and the occasional splash of tonic. There are gruel recipes involving ingredients that sound like roofing materials. If all else fails, there's always another drop of syrup. The daily ritual of feeding a Victorian baby is equal parts science experiment and desperate improvisation. You are at the mercy of advice leaflets, neighbours' wild claims, and the shaming looks of visiting aunts. You have read somewhere that boiled turnip water is fortifying. You try it, only to witness a facial expression from your baby that communicates, even without words, "Why have you betrayed me?" Undeterred, you move on to the next item suggested in the Ladies' Home Journal, a medley of mashed peas, stale crusts, and an indistinct white sauce that might once have contained milk or might simply be wishful thinking. No one can quite agree on what food agrees with babies. Grandmothers advocate feeding them whatever the dog eats. It never did us any harm. Whilst your more fashionable friends whisper about newly imported tinned foods, which might just be oyster sauce or might be paint in a cunning disguise, there's frequent speculation at the breakfast table over precisely how much gruel is too much gruel, and whether the addition of a thimble of brandy counts as continental or simply reckless. Compounding all this is the ever-looming threat from the milkman. He arrives with bottles clinking optimistically, but what's actually inside is anyone's guess. Sometimes it's milk, sometimes it's a pale approximation thereof, occasionally tinted blue or curdled beyond rescue. Articles proliferate about the perils of milk adulteration. If the germs don't get you, the chemicals will. In response, you are encouraged to boil everything twice, then add barley water for texture, thus ensuring your baby's first taste experiences range from bland to utterly baffling. Of course, not everyone can supply fresh, nourishing meals daily. There are formula recipes circulating that involve arrowroot biscuits, with or without the addition of mutton fat. Your baby will not notice, promises the parenting pamphlet. Your baby, however, is registering a complaint that only a Victorian mind could ignore. Some have experimented with eggs beaten into oblivion, diluted port wine for teething discomfort, or, when desperate, a shadowy concoction labelled patent food, its ingredients forever cloaked in secrecy, perhaps for good reason. Dinner, or taking supper for grand effect, is often a performance for the benefit of onlookers. Spoons are brandished, bibs are tied with military precision, and the spoonfuls alternate between reluctant acceptance and outright mutiny. Sometimes an enterprising relative volunteers to bring their famous beef broth. The result is a kitchen briefly overtaken by the scent of boiling sinew. The broth itself, alarmingly gelatinous, is supposed to stick to their ribs, but mostly sticks to everything else. Still, there are moments of triumph. A carefully mashed apple, stripped of every conceivable trace of peel or core. A reassuring pat of unsalted butter on toast, soothing to the gums. Or, on the rare occasion, a small spoonful of actual cream straight from the top of the churn. These are celebrated like royal feasts. The clattering tray, the high-pitched squeal of protest turning, finally to an accepting, messy smile. For one moment, parent and child are united at the table in cautious but genuine satisfaction. Tomorrow, of course, it starts all over again, with new recommendations and fresh anxieties. But tonight, as you wipe mashed carrot from the wallpaper and fish a discarded crust from beneath the chair, you can at least say, dinner has been served, and everyone, by some small miracle, has survived. Victorian medicine is nothing if not experimental. The doctor arrives with a dramatic flourish, possibly on horseback. He prescribes a mixture of cod liver oil, opium, and a faint hope that everything will work itself out. The good doctor's entrance is every bit a performance. Cloaked in a black frock coat, he sweeps into the parlour, his leather bag heavy with vials and secret syrups. The family, desperate and hopeful, watches as he noisily sets up his portable apothecary on the mahogany sideboard. Coughing children are gently propped up with pillows. Adults stand by, holding back their skepticism with the same vigour as they clutch their handkerchiefs. In the flickering light, the doctor surveys his patients and announces, with great confidence, a diagnosis that sounds suspiciously made up. General malaise complicated by excess of humours. Nods of agreement ripple through the room, not because anyone understands, but because it sounds suitably dire. With the diagnosis served, a procession of tonics and tinctures commences. Cod liver oil is ladled out with the solemnity of a priest distributing communion, chased by a few drops of laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, against the howls of the afflicted. "It'll help you sleep," the doctor reassures, glossing over the possibility of dependency or worse. Next, a bewildering array of pills and powders is presented, each more vile tasting than the last. Camphor for fevers, digitalis for the weak of heart, and if all else fails, a leech or two for good measure. The application of leeches, he notes, is a sure sign of modern scientific progress, a dab hand with the latest in bloodletting. The scene is played out with utter seriousness. The doctor's words are law, his methods sacrosanct, even if they owe more to theatrical flair than evidence. Mothers wring their hands in gratitude, while fathers discreetly exchange glances that say, "Do we actually have to pay for this?" The doctor, oblivious or uncaring, is already recommending rest, cold compresses, and, if the fever persists, an excursion to the seaside, preferably a fashionable and expensive one. Underlying the spectacle is a strange optimism, a faith that something, anything, will work. The family pins its hopes on today's prescriptions, setting aside the fact that last week's patent medicines promised the same miracles. No matter. Perhaps this time the doctor has hit upon the magical combination. In between ministrations, he offers faint encouragement. The patient is young and strong. The tides may yet turn. A question about second opinions is met with a smile and a reminder that too many cooks spoil the broth. Not all are convinced, of course. Granny, knitting resolutely by the fire, mutters about the old days, when all that was needed for a cough was onion syrup and a hot brick at the feet. The children, meanwhile, eye the opium bottle with a mixture of dread and fascination. One suspects that even the family dog keeps a wary distance from the cod liver oil spoon. Yet the rituals of Victorian medicine persist. Even as cures prove elusive, the pomp and ceremony impart a comforting illusion of control. To rail against the doctor, or his dubious concoctions, would be almost sacrilegious. Better, perhaps, to swallow the dread mixture and hope for the best. As the doctor tips his hat and heads to the next household in need of his services, the family is left to monitor for miraculous recovery, or at least for a lessening of symptoms. Should the patient improve, the doctor's brilliance is lauded. Should things worsen, well, surely it means illness was simply too mighty to conquer, even by science's finest. In the end, Victorian medicine as practiced in the parlour is a curious blend of faith, performance, and the placebo effect, with just a drop of genuine science, diluted thoroughly in a pint of hope. Every Sunday, ladies parade their infants in prams, as if at a competitive vegetable show. The quietest babies win prizes. Nobody asks why the winning baby is drooling and staring into the middle distance. It's best not to pry. Public parenting, especially when it collides with the weekly rituals of the baby show, becomes its own Olympic event. Toddlers scrubbed gleaming, mothers dressed as if for an afternoon tea with the Queen, and fathers lurking at the perimeter, unsure what to do with their hands. There's a hushed tension in the air. The sense that at any moment, a stray squeal or unexpected spit-up could spell social disaster. The stakes are high. One small outburst, and all hopes of glory are lost. Mrs. Bracknell's baby once hiccuped in the judging round, and she was never quite the same afterwards. There's an unspoken rule that any deviation from serene docility must be explained away, ideally with medical-sounding jargon. Teething, intone mothers gravely, or a touch of colic, quietly, as if invoking the spirit of Florence Nightingale. And of course, comparisons begin in earnest. Arabella was already sleeping through the night at 6 weeks, boasts one, while another insists, "Oh, but Barnaby could recite the alphabet before he could crawl." Over time, a certain myth-making develops. Some mothers swear their offspring can sense the arrival of the judge by the subtle tightening of shoulders and sudden increase in shushing. Judges, meanwhile, operate with an air of faux impartiality, peering into prams with a mix of curiosity and dread, hoping to avoid the unpredictable splash zone of baby behaviour. It is generally understood but never spoken. The quieter the baby, the easier everyone's Sunday. The loud ones risk spoiling both their parents' afternoon and the fragile collective peace. The social dynamics among the parents are just as delicate. There are congratulatory murmurs and exchanged glances full of coded meaning. Winners, always modest in triumph, accept ribbons with a "well, I do try, but you know how babies are," while losers retreat into the shadow of sympathetic whispers. "He's just spirited," one mother sighs as her son enthusiastically removes both socks and one shoe, hurling them into the adjoining flower bed. Beneath it all simmers a low-level anxiety, a need to prove that one's offspring is content, undemanding, and most importantly, not ruining the day for the other parents. It is a theatre of perfection set upon the village green, where reality is gently massaged and awkward truths quickly hushed. Still, there are moments of solidarity. If a rogue infant launches into an unscheduled wail, an unspoken alliance forms among the unluckier parents. Sometimes, knowing nods or wry shrugs are exchanged, subtle reminders that beneath the showy hats and forced smiles, everyone is muddling through as best they can. The baby show's peculiar pageantry reveals far more about the adults than the infants. Babies, after all, are just being babies, oblivious to the drama unfolding above their bonnets. The true competition, the one for composure, reputation, and unchecked superiority, plays out among the pram pushers. The event becomes less about the children and more about the desperate attempt to project effortlessness, to assure spectators and themselves that parenting is as seamless as perfectly creased linens and a dozing infant in a lacy white shawl. Yet, for all its genteel absurdity, something tender persists. The show offers a fleeting chance for parents to be seen and celebrated, even if only for keeping a straight face while their child drools goldfish crackers down the front of a christening gown. Next Sunday, the same faces will gather, prams polished anew, hopes refreshed, and everyone pretending, if just for an hour, that the baby show is about babies at all. The latest guidebook suggests bathing your baby in gin and never letting them sleep after noon. The chapter on rest reads mostly like an apology to the reader, followed by a reminder not to trust anyone born before 1800. At this point, you might be wondering whether the parenting section at your local bookstore has veered into performance art. Every book, no matter how reassuring the pastel-coloured cover, seems to contain some deeply cursed advice. Page 1. Feed your child exclusively on turnips. By Chapter 4. If your toddler is teething, consider enrolling them in a fencing class to work out their emotions. All of it delivered in a tone so confident, so serenely self-certain, you begin to suspect the author has never met an actual child. Let's be honest. The main appeal of these tomes lies in their absolute conviction that everything you're currently doing is wrong, and possibly a misdemeanor in 3 states. Page after page, you are introduced to new anxieties you never knew you could have. The night weaning protocol outlined on page 64, for instance, requires a spreadsheet, a whistle, and presumably an advanced diploma in Olympic-level sprinting. By the end, it's clear that raising a child under these rules would demand a sleep schedule previously reserved for NASA engineers. Of course, the historical parenting advice columns were no better. In 1850, a best-selling manual insisted that letting a child make eye contact with a goat would doom them to a lifetime of lawlessness. The 1922 handbook, Sleep, Feed, Conquer, the Baby Regiment, argued for swaddling infants so tightly as to preclude all motor development until age 4, at which point the child would simply spring forth, fully formed. Much of their wisdom can be summarized as, the solution is probably leeches. Contemporary advice isn't necessarily less deranged, it's simply delivered with better illustrations. One current bestseller devotes 3 chapters to the proper feng shui arrangement of sippy cups. Another outlines a 12-step discipline strategy, so elaborate it begins to resemble the Geneva Conventions. There's a significant amount of emphasis on mindful snack plating, which is apparently the only known way to prevent your preschooler from turning into a raccoon person. The assertion is blunt. Lose control of the kale chips, and you may as well sign up for juvenile court now. Even the more practical advice rapidly enters the realm of high fantasy. Something as simple as establishing a bedtime routine quickly becomes a logistical nightmare. According to modern expert consensus, this now requires a soothing soundscape, a 7-part breathing ritual, and, crucially, a bespoke ritual object, preferably hand-knitted by Tibetan monks. Any deviation, you're warned, and the window for optimal brain growth slams permanently shut, leaving your offspring destined for a life of interpretive dance busking at traffic lights. And then, there are the testimonials. After just 6 weeks on the regimented celery diet, our daughter began speaking Mandarin and composing small operas. Beams one Amazon review, written, one suspects, by either the author's mother or a bot with a celery fetish. The internet is littered with similar boosters, all of whom claim their newborn now thrives on ambient Gregorian chant and rarely attempts to unionize. In some, parenting books, for all their good intentions, seem less concerned with producing functional young adults and more focused on establishing a kind of competitive sport for parents. Pro tip: you are not failing. You are merely participating in Generation 37 of the Great Parental Anxiety Olympics. Take a breath, put down the gin, unless you're bathing the baby again. And remember, the only advice worth following is this: trust your child, trust yourself, and don't believe anyone who says napping after noon will transport your child to the underworld. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments or want this tailored for a specific medium or audience. Sometimes, even opium can't tame a truly determined tantrum. Victorian homes feature stain-resistant furnishings, as if expecting frequent explosions, either from the babies or the adults. At least everything wipes clean. Oilcloth, a sturdy, waxed fabric, was the unsung hero of Victorian interior design. Picture sun-faded parlour sofas swaddled in a shroud of shiny, waterproof fabric that crackled ominously under the weight of a visitor's anxious posture. Every settee, every chaise carried its own protective shell, ready to endure whatever domestic storm might descend. Mothers eyed the furniture with the vigilance of ship captains, prepared for sea squalls or, at the very least, an infant who just mastered the art of projectile plum pudding. But why such a level of preparedness? Victorian decor wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a form of risk management. Children, of course, were notorious agents of chaos, equipped with sticky hands, mysterious stains, and a flair for theatrical distress. Yet, it wasn't just the little ones who threatened upholstery. The era's adults were, let's say, highly strung. Repressed emotions and rigid social codes often left people with only two options: passive-aggressive embroidery or a spectacular drawing room meltdown. One distraught aunt could reduce even the sturdiest ottoman to a cautionary tale. Hence the oilcloth. Not a style choice, but a survival mechanism. Even with the best of intentions, household calm wasn't guaranteed. Etiquette books insisted on composure, but the average Victorian day saw a veritable relay race of frayed nerves. Afternoon tea could swiftly devolve into full-scale emotional triage, frantic fanning, abrupt fainting spells, and the relentless deployment of smelling salts. Meanwhile, the oilcloth stood silent sentinel, immune to both tears and tea spills. Naturally, this practicality clashed with aspirational gentility. Period illustrations show elegant ladies perched on sofas with all the enthusiasm of cats discovering bathwater. It may look like a scene from a costume drama, but you can nearly hear the crinkle, every graceful shift an auditory reminder of domestic reality. For all of Queen Victoria's immortal resolve, even she could not dictate the temperament of toddlers or the stability of furniture legs. The efforts to maintain order could get downright creative. Some households turned to elaborate house rules. No shrieking in the green room, or the piano bench is not for sulking. Others simply doubled down on upholstery reinforcements, doubling layers of oilcloth or introducing special meltdown mats for high-risk individuals. These were homes designed for emotional spillage as much as actual spillage. Of course, the problem was never fully solved. A true Victorian meltdown, whether delivered by a colicky baby or an overwrought uncle, could not always be contained by fabric, no matter how waterproof. But the oilcloth stood as proof of an era's optimism, that a well-governed household might, with enough wax, withstand the floods. It's a touchingly human detail in a world of moral maxims and gaslight, one small rebellion against chaos. And so we remember the oilcloth, wrinkled guardian of the family sofa, trusted by mothers, feared by overzealous pudding eaters, and immortalised by every unfortunate visitor whose silk trousers squeaked across its surface. If you happen to visit a Victorian parlour and find yourself sticking to the settee, take heart, you're not alone. Generations found solace in knowing that no matter the magnitude of the meltdown, at least the furniture could recover. Victorian infant fashion is best described as high risk, low reward. Your child's bonnet has more ribbons than a department store, and at least 3 things they're wearing could double as tourniquets or medieval punishment devices. Before you've even taken your first blurry daguerreotype, your baby has been wrapped, strapped, laced, and smothered in more decorative hardware than a hardware store. The person in charge of designing these outfits must have been equal parts tailor and magician. because the effort it takes to get a 3-month-old into 6 layers of ruffles, 3 petticoats, and a bib with enough embroidery to write a novella is nothing short of wizardry. It's as if the main goal of baby clothing in this era was to ensure each nap is fraught with mortal peril. And let's face it, that's one way to guarantee the baby isn't going anywhere. And don't even think about baby-proofing your house. Back then, the baby was barely even parent-proof. If your infant managed to get through the morning without ribbon burn or accidentally tying themselves to the nursery furniture, congratulations, that's a win. Meanwhile, the family dog, who has developed an acute survival instinct, knows to steer clear of serenely cooing infants, who are, for all practical purposes, heavily armed with dangling, fluttering bits of fashion shrapnel. Why did Victorians do this to their babies? 2 words: social appearances. Babies were essentially mobile status symbols with cheeks. Dressing your child in elaborate lace, bonnets with chin ties you could use to secure a small boat, and gowns featuring enough pearl buttons to restock a haberdashery was a public statement of refinement. There was an unspoken game of who could make their offspring look most like a decorative cake topper, or alternatively, a very tiny, very fussy Victorian ghost. Let's not forget the lace. Endless, infinite, mind-boggling lace. Victorian lace was so ubiquitous that historians struggled to determine where a baby ended and the lace began. Each new frill and loop seemed to defy the laws of physics, giving infants an ever-expanding radius of delicate, easily torn fabric. It's hard to believe these outfits were designed for creatures whose main hobbies include drooling, flailing, and sudden projectile blinking. On the bright side, lace is excellent at catching stray baby teeth and the occasional dribble, so at least it's somewhat practical in its absurdity. Of course, all this finery had an unfortunate downside: choking and strangulation hazards. With each extra sash, tie, and ornamental bow, the odds of your child accidentally garroting themselves doubled. Parent handbooks of the day, and yes, they existed, though they read more like Dickensian comedy than childcare advice, were filled with gentle reminders to secure all ribbons delicately and avoid alarming tightness, as if that was the only thing preventing baby from moonlighting as Houdini. And still, mothers persisted, not out of malice, but because this is what you do. Doting aunts would knit more ribbons and apply appliqué. Grandmothers would fuss over the precise placement of lace collars, and fathers, upon seeing their newborn so outfitted, would make vague comments about the child being prepared for society's harsh winds. It was all very earnest, dangerously, hilariously, absurdly earnest. Does all this sound a bit much? Welcome to the world of Victorian baby couture, where fashion trumps function, tiny shoes outnumber tiny feet, and every nap is a high-stakes encounter with the perils of haberdashery. If nothing else, the chaos of baby fashion prepared parents for the never-ending hazard course that was Victorian childhood. Whatever didn't strangle you probably built character, or at least a stronger gag reflex. This segment maintains your established tone, witty, playful, and sharply observational, while layering in historical context and continued comedic exaggeration around the theme. Let me know if you'd like to adjust anything. Run out of the good stuff? No problem. Just reach for gin, whiskey, or herbal teas that are basically just unfiltered pond water. Anything to keep the peace, or at the very least, put everyone to sleep. Of course, desperation is the mother of invention, especially when it comes to filling a wine glass. If the table runs dry, most hosts will put on their best apologetic face and assure guests that the dregs of whatever unlabeled bottle they have lurking in the back of the liquor cabinet have aged beautifully since last year's New Year's Eve party. Never mind the cobwebs or the suspiciously faded label. In the right company, and with sufficiently dim lighting, almost anything can pass for a top-shelf vintage. The art of substitution quickly becomes a test of resourcefulness and social finesse. One brave soul might emerge with a half-open bottle of gin, raising it aloft, as if hoping to summon memories of happier, better-stocked days. Just add tonic and a squeeze of citrus, someone will venture, as if those two ingredients will mask the unmistakable sting of forgotten spirit. Mixers become the hero of the night. Flat ginger ale, that mysterious bottle of apple juice, the last spoonful of honey. Who needs a sommelier when you have the creativity of a party that refuses to admit defeat? But the well of inspiration, like the drinks cabinet, can run unexpectedly dry. This is the point where herbal teas make their entrance. If anyone suggests a round of chamomile, it's a sure sign the evening has officially gone off the rails. Still, there is a certain solidarity in sipping steaming mugs together, making solemn pronouncements about the nuanced floral character of the tepid brew, while everyone quietly wonders how much caffeine is acceptable at this hour. The rules bend and then break, especially if someone finds a stray mint tea bag wedged at the back of the pantry, which is greeted like a long-lost treasure. Let's not forget the ever-present wildcard: creative concoctions. Someone inevitably will get inspired and attempt to craft a signature cocktail from whatever ingredients remain. The resulting potion is typically a blend so odd and so bold, it will never be repeated. But in the thick of the moment, it feels like an act of minor genius. It's got a complex finish, a guest may declare. And it does, mostly because no one can quite figure out what's in it. With each substitution, the rituals and expectations of the evening evolve. Gone are the elegant pours and ritual clinks. In their place, a shared camaraderie forms, fortified by collective resourcefulness, or, perhaps, collective delusion. Where there was once the comfort of routine, there is now the strange satisfaction of having made do, and the rebellious pride that comes from laughing about it together. By the end of the night, the line between thirsty and satisfied grows blurrier with every creative pour, and stories begin to outshine the drinks themselves. In the face of empty bottles, it's not about what's in the glass, but about the company, a theme that every desperate substitute manages to underscore. The real highlight isn't a vintage port or expertly mixed cocktail, but the stories traded, laughter shared, and the good-natured resignation that, like it or not, tonight, tap water might just have to do. Eventually someone notices their baby's gone from peaceful to suspiciously catatonic. Whispers circulate that too much opium might be not great. Suddenly, everyone's an expert in herbal teas. It starts quietly, like all little revolutions do. At the town market, the midwives gather near the baker's stall. Their voices are low, eyes darting, arms cradling anything but that tiny blue bottle. There are stories. One mother complains her son, once hungry enough to gnaw the legs off his crib, now only stares blankly at the ceiling, unmoved even by bread pudding. Another recalls her neighbour's child who, after months of soothing syrup, seems neither soothed nor lively. The streets begin to echo with a new vocabulary: unresponsive, floppy, lacking appetite. For mothers who once envied a neighbour's silent baby, the shine is wearing off. Wisdom travels fast where worry is shared. Within weeks, elderly aunts and former nannies start issuing dire warnings. Give her dandelion root, not laudanum. A once coveted bottle gathers dust atop the mantle as mothers swap recipes for oat water, barley tea, and honey milk. Anything to avoid another vacant-eyed afternoon. Some, desperate, return to ancestral remedies abandoned when the pharmacist's new elixirs sparkled with promise. Lavender compresses, lukewarm baths, and endless rocking make a comeback. No one admits outright that they regret dosing their child, but when the laudanum salesman knocks, fewer doors open. Still, not everyone is ready to trade a silent evening for a colicky night. There's a clamour in the air, half guilt, half stubborn hope that the dose was too big, that a little less will solve it. But then, as days pass, the evidence mounts. Rumours reach households faster than the doctor. Children sleeping through fire alarms, toddlers unable to muster a tantrum, infants growing thinner and weaker. Even stern apothecaries begin to mutter about possible side effects. For every mother clinging to the dream of a quiet, easy baby, two more begin to eye the bottle with suspicion. As the suspicion gathers weight, so too does a new form of camaraderie. Streets once filled with shame-tinged silence are now charged with cautious triumph. "My Mary hasn't had syrup in a week. She giggled this morning," a mother boasts, to hushed admiration. The brave few who swear off nostrum are eyed as pioneers. Some even notice that their children, rediscovered, are more themselves. No pudgy cheeks, but life in their cries and laughter. Kitchen tables become laboratories again, assembling makeshift teas and poultices, and mothers compare notes on which remedies bring sleep without robbing personality. And what of regret? It simmers, mostly unspoken. No one wants to admit they trusted something harmful, but the shift, subtle at first, grows visible in the routines of daily life. The laudanum bottle, once symbolic of modern convenience, is quietly replaced by a well-worn tea infuser or a sprig of dried chamomile hanging from a rafter. Salesmen find fewer takers, children's cheeks grow pinker, and the once rare sound of childish squabbling returns to the lanes. In a final, unseen act of penance, old bottles vanish down privies, or are passed around only as cautionary tales. The collective wisdom of mothers edges forward. A little less faith in miracle cures, a little more in the resilience of a small, protesting child, and a newfound solidarity in sharing the uncertainty. The first signs of regret, it turns out, are also the seeds of revival. One whispered warning, one abandoned bottle at a time. A public health inspector visits right after he's done with the meatpacking plants. There's hand-wringing, finger-pointing, and a pamphlet campaign that bravely suggests less opium, more hugs. Of course, the inspector's arrival is both expected and somehow completely surprising. He appears in a cloud of bureaucratic determination, clutching a battered clipboard already stained with something that, one suspects, is neither ink nor coffee. The local officials gather as if summoned by an existential lunch bell. Mayor, police chief, even the librarian, who insists on taking minutes. They're all here to crowd the inspector's personal space and wager on who will take the most blame. Each official stands in a posture carefully designed to indicate both concern and plausible deniability. The inspector begins with the questions. Was the water source in any way compromised? No, unless you count the time Jimmy fell in last summer, which most have politely decided to forget. Is anyone, by any chance, stockpiling suspicious quantities of tinned fish or cough syrup? An embarrassed silence, followed by a unanimous decision to ignore the local grocer's new bulk specials board. The inspector jots down notes, nods knowingly, and sighs the distinctive sigh of a man who knows his report will be filed under too complicated to fix. The townspeople themselves are not consulted, at least not formally. Still, word spreads faster than a cold in a crowded carriage. By supper, every household has received at least one pamphlet. Opium is no friend to the family table. And heard 3 conflicting rumours about the inspector's next steps. Some panic, stocking up on soap and swapping nervous glances at the postman. Others are more philosophical. It's all a bit of fuss, says old Mrs. Pennington, like when we thought the moon was going to fall out of the sky. Didn't happen then, either. The pamphlet campaign, with its cheerfully naive art and suspiciously upbeat slogans, becomes an unintentional town joke. Children trade them like rare marbles. One particularly savvy boy uses opium out, hugs in, as a bookmark in his copy of Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque. Nevertheless, the inspector's visit sparks brief, mild panic among the more impressionable, the sort that prompts an extra hand, washing, or an uncharacteristic interest in herbal teas. Back at headquarters, the mayor calls an urgent meeting that achieves nothing except the dramatic devouring of 2 coffee cakes and the approval of a vigilance committee. The committee's responsibilities are ill-defined, but it boasts an official armband and a practical veto over all future bake sales. For their part, local business owners display signs in their windows, some serious, "We do not sell opium," and some less so, "Try our famous opium-free scones, now with more raisins." Rumours begin to surface, none of them helpful. Perhaps the inspector is really a spy for a rival town. Maybe the pamphlets are coded messages for a secret society. You see the way that Daisy is drawn? That means something, don't it? The general mood leans toward low-grade suspense, seasoned with a pinch of stubborn village humour. Everyone agrees it's best to act concerned, or at least to look like one is considering being concerned. As the days pass, the inspector departs, congratulated for his valiant efforts, and the authorities declare a cautious victory. No new outbreaks, no sudden hysteria, just the lingering scent of damp pamphlets and a collective sigh of relief. In the end, the episode becomes another story for the town's collection, retold with increasing embellishment at every opportunity. Remember when the inspector came and how we nearly banned poppy seed muffins just in case? For now, order prevails. The pamphlets curl in the corners, the committee meets once and promptly disbands, and the feeling remains that something, somewhere, was probably done. Maybe, just maybe, there are a few more hugs. But opium? Not so much. Some mothers start questioning this whole narcotize your child trend. Books are burned, old vials go missing, and fresh air suddenly becomes all the rage. Congratulations, you're basically a pioneer. But being a pioneer here doesn't mean you've stumbled on cutting-edge science. No, it means you notice your toddler does not, in fact, thrive on daily doses of laudanum any more than you thrive on arsenic face cream. There's an uneasy, communal stirring that perhaps, just perhaps, letting babies roll around in what passes for grass actually does more for their health than dosing them to sleep, so you can finally do the laundry. Society's concerned parents turn into accidental scientists. They record, with maybe a quill and an unreliable ledger, things like, "Little Edward coughed less after a week outdoors." It's not double-blind. It's not very systematic. But for the first time, you have data that doesn't come from Dr. Saunders's Health Remedies magazine, sponsored by Dr. Saunders' Health Remedies. Instead, you get worried pamphlets and the earliest glimmers of what will, in a few dusty decades, be known as the child welfare movement. Gradually, parental intuition, the hunches, the midnight doubts, the reluctant admissions of maybe Granny was right about cod liver oil, starts chipping away at Victorian orthodoxy. You and your fellow mothers become reluctant disruptors. The nursery is no longer a laudanum-scented cave. The window is cracked open. Each day, you're greeted by the new, alarming possibility that your child's brain could grow to full size without ever being quieted by syrup. In the starchy silence, you wipe sweat from your brow and pray that nobody reports you to the magazine for unfit mothers. Meanwhile, the forces of reaction mount a counterattack. The more radical physicians label you an upstart, a troublemaker. Your mother-in-law wonders aloud if you've been reading French novels again. The street corner pharmacist sighs at your sophistication and sells you, reluctantly, a bar of coal tar soap when you pass over the cough syrup. And yet, quietly, the numbers begin to speak. Accidental overdoses go down. Some children start surviving into robust, mischief-prone adolescence. Dodging the drug seems not entirely crazy. Of course, you're learning not just from bold defiance, but from small embarrassments. Little Emily, previously asleep for half her young life, is now awake long enough to babble her first words, which, in her cranky opinion, ought to include more gruel. You notice she falls down a lot, scrapes her knees, and lives to tell the tale. By Victorian standards, this makes you reckless. By modern ones, you've invented letting kids be kids. Old habits die hard, though. There are relapses. Tough days, teething babies, neighbours sniffing about your modern ways. Sometimes you hesitate at the pharmacy, tempted by the comfort of a quick fix vial. Sometimes you grit your teeth and stick to your guns, heart pounding as you invite another parent to the park instead of the apothecary. There are awkward conversations about child-sized spoons, about what safe even means. Sometimes you're ridiculed, sometimes cautiously you're imitated. Bit by bit, your refusing hand, held a little too tightly on the stroller, a little too loosely on the medicine bottle, leaves finger smudges on a new world. You don't spark a revolution overnight. You don't magically transform from gossip to guru. Yet by year's end, there are more children at play, fewer quiet homes, and a quietly blooming rumour that perhaps motherly intuition may, just this once, be onto something. Congratulations, you've learned, just barely, to be a little less Victorian and a great deal more yourself. Somehow, your child survives, as do you. The world will move on to decaf coffee, non-alcoholic cough syrup, and eventually sleep training books written by people with access to electricity. Children, as it turns out, are remarkably resilient, perhaps more so than the parents raising them. Maybe it's evolution's way of tipping the scales in favour of the young and the reckless. Or maybe the universe just enjoys watching exhausted adults try to fit advice from 5 different centuries into a single Thursday night. Today's parents Google everything, order sound machines in 2-day shipping, and exchange tips on parenting forums, where every thread ends with someone recommending goat yoga, oat milk, or switching to organic brand name diapers, just in case. But here's the catch. Even when knowledge moves forward, wisdom has a way of lagging behind. For every great-grandparent's tale of whiskey-soaked pacifiers and coal-heated nursery bricks, there's a new, modern remedy promising to finally fix what's ailed humanity since the first caves echoed with baby wails. In every era, parents have resorted to whatever tools and tricks were at hand, whether that meant dosing infants with camphor or hosting midnight prayer circles on Facebook. If you leaf through the how-to guides of any age, you'll see a pattern. Outdated wisdom tends to haunt the modern household, dressed up as tradition. That guaranteed teething cure your aunt swore by traces its roots back to days when nobody knew the difference between a fever and a fever dream. Advice comes around like fashion, only more dangerous, amber necklaces, sugar-rubbed gums, let them cry out versus never let them cry alone. The marketing changes, but the promise remains. This generation, finally, will get it right. And yet, no product, Victorian or otherwise, has ever produced a child who sleeps through thunderstorms, teething, and teething thunderstorms. Some parents lean all the way into innovation. For them, the next generation is a live experiment in sleep tracking apps, white noise playlists curated by neuroscientists, and cribs that evaluate your child's breathing rate while you lie awake, wide-eyed, wondering if you should have trusted the more old-fashioned method involving a rock and a lullaby. Others retreat into nostalgia certain that ancient wisdom holds the key, even if that ancient wisdom includes things now grouped firmly in what not to do. Still, somehow, most kids make it through, often in spite of our best intentions. The lesson, if there is one, isn't that the next generation will be healthier, happier, or any less ridiculous in their parenting attempts. It's that the desperate hope for a miracle sleep solution is universal, an inheritance as solid as a baby's first blanket. Every era's parents believe they're doing it wrong, and every era's children grow up, eventually, to write new books, record newer podcasts, and offer their own questionable solutions to the cycle of sleepless nights. This is the real lesson. History never guarantees. You can't future-proof parenthood. You can only make your peace with uncertainty, laugh at the rituals of those who came before, and realize the reason we survived laudanum, lead paint, and whatever was in that mysterious cordial bottle is not because our ancestors had it figured out, but because life, mercifully, endures in spite of us all. So when you reach for the nightlight or the lavender-scented sleep spray, think of it as your own small contribution to the centuries-long experiment in giving the next generation a slightly better night's rest. And if you fail, well, join the club. You're in excellent tired company. So, as you sink into your mattress tonight, take a moment to appreciate the fact that nobody tried to cure your insomnia with anything labelled laudanum or cordial. History's full of desperate parents and baffling solutions, none more memorable or sleep-inducing than spoon-feeding babies a little something extra. Sure, Victorian mums may not have had baby monitors or pacifiers that glow in the dark, but they endured, improvised, and, against all odds, raised generations of finely dressed, heavily medicated children who managed to grow up into the next generation of creative and slightly anxious problem solvers. Tonight, be grateful for baby Tylenol, for safe sleeping spaces, and for the calm certainty that whatever strange advice your parents gave was probably not quite as unhinged as the 19th century's greatest hits, because history isn't just made of empires or revolutions, it's made of tired people trying to get a little peace and quiet. Sleep well, and remember, being a little ridiculous is almost always better than being a little too relaxed. So, as you sink into your mattress tonight, take a moment to appreciate the fact that nobody tried to cure your insomnia with anything labelled laudanum or cordial. History's full of desperate parents and baffling solutions, none more memorable or sleep-inducing than spoon-feeding babies a little something extra. Sure, Victorian mums may not have had baby monitors or pacifiers that glow in the dark, but they endured, improvised, and, against all odds, raised generations of finely dressed, heavily medicated children who managed to grow up into the next generation of creative and slightly anxious problem solvers. Tonight, be grateful for baby Tylenol, for safe sleeping spaces, and for the calm certainty that whatever strange advice your parents gave was probably not quite as unhinged as the 19th century's greatest hits. Because history isn't just made of empires or revolutions. It's made of tired people trying to get a little peace and quiet, sleep well, and remember, being a little ridiculous is almost always better than being a little too relaxed.